You think you're less likely than average to get divorced, less likely to lose your job, less likely to get seriously sick. So does almost everyone else, rating themselves against that same average. Statistically, that cannot all be true at once. And yet your brain is already completely sure you're the exception. What's actually happening is a real, measured pattern researchers call the optimism bias. And it isn't just a mood, it's a specific, lopsided way your brain updates what it believes. In 2011, neuroscientist Tali Sharot and colleagues had people estimate their own odds of bad things happening to them, divorce, unemployment, serious illness, then told each person the real statistical base rate. Some found out they'd been too pessimistic, others too optimistic. Then everyone re-rated their own odds a second time. Here's the asymmetry. When the real numbers were better than people expected, they updated their beliefs sharply, pulling their estimate close to the good news almost immediately. But when the real numbers were worse than expected, most people barely moved their estimate at all, as if the bad news had only partly registered. Brain scans traced this straight to specific regions of the frontal cortex, which reliably tracked errors when the news called for more optimism, and went strangely quiet when the news called for less. It isn't that people ignore bad news entirely. Their brains are simply built to file it away far less efficiently than good news. And this shows up in roughly 8 out of every 10 people tested, not just a naturally cheerful few. You'd expect the flip side of this to be simple. If optimists are biased upward, pessimists must just be the clear-eyed ones, finally seeing the numbers straight. That idea has its own name, depressive realism, from a famous 1979 study where mildly depressed participants judged their own control over a random event far more accurately than everyone else who wildly overestimated it. For decades, this got repeated as settled fact. The sad ones are the sane ones. It doesn't hold up. When researchers went back to test it properly, a 2012 review pooling 75 separate studies and a fully pre-registered replication attempt a decade later, the sadder but wiser effect nearly vanished. The statistical size of it came out at essentially zero, nowhere near strong enough to support the story everyone had been repeating. Pessimists were not secretly the accurate ones all along. Almost nobody in this picture is running on a neutral, undistorted read of reality. Most people are just optimistic to different degrees, using the same lopsided machinery, and the version of wisdom that supposedly came with pessimism turned out to be mostly a myth that was easy to believe because it sounded clever. A skeptic might say, this asymmetry is really just a feature of naturally sunny people, not something built into everyone. But 8 in 10 is not a cheerful subset, it's most of the room, smart and cautious people included, and the effect shows up on a brain scanner whether or not someone would ever call themselves an optimist out loud. And to be clear, this isn't about being gullible or bad at math. People in these studies could do the arithmetic just fine. The bias isn't in the calculation, it's in which half of the answer the brain bothers to fully absorb. Once you know to look for it. This same lopsided updating shows up anywhere someone is rating their own risk. Investors hold on to a falling stock far longer than the numbers justify, because the bad quarterly report gets discounted while a single good one gets believed completely. Smokers correctly know the statistics on lung disease and still each rate their own personal odds as lower than the average smokers. Someone renewing a gym membership in January is certain this time is different, even with a drawer full of unused past memberships as evidence. A driver who's had 2 near misses this year still rates themselves as safer than average because each near miss got filed away as someone else's fault rather than a real update to their own odds. In every one of these cases, the actual numbers were sitting right there, fully available. The asymmetry was never about the math, and it was never about which side of the crash statistics anyone secretly believed. It was always about which piece of news the brain was willing to fully absorb. So the next time you catch yourself rating your own odds as better than the numbers say, that isn't naivety, and it isn't something only positive people do. It's a documented asymmetry in how most human brains file away good news versus bad, and neither the optimists nor the pessimists in the room ever had the unbiased version. One side just believed a more flattering story about which of them did. You were never actually consulted about which half of the evidence your brain would bother to fully update on. It made that call on its own, long before you got to weigh in, And it's already rewriting tonight's version of tomorrow before you've even finished reading this sentence. And your sense of your own odds isn't the only place your brain quietly edits the story before handing it to you. Wait until you see what it does to a memory every single time you take it back out to look at it again.